All right, A-Push Scholars, Mr. Beamer here. We want to thank Enya, singer Enya, for the intro song. And basically, those words, sailing away, refers to the United States of America. In this chapter, our ship is sailing. We launched our ship of states. We are starting out as a new country. We are finishing up period 3. And this is the first part of the last chapter of period 3, chapter 10a, over those pages. And here's the quote from Alexander Hamilton. Basically, he's saying, we are special. What we do, you probably can't do in Paris and in Russia. We have an amazing country. Also, we've got over 20 slides. This is going to be a long video. I am going to be as quick as I can, so be quiet, Beamer. Okay. Okay, famous painting, Washington crossing the Delaware, and this is the image I want you to think about. Our country is starting new, and will it be successful going through a bridge over troubled waters? I really don't know what that meant, but I'm going to move on. Okay, chapter 10 is over the first two presidents of the United States of America, George Washington and John Adams. Washington did not have a political party, although his beliefs were very much like the Federalists, so his party was none, and he was president for 8 years, 1789 to 1797. He was elected twice. John Adams took over as the second president. He was part of the Federalist Party. He was actually the only Federalist president ever. He was president for only 4 years. First section is a new ship on an uncertain sea, and that refers to the United States of America sailing off with the new Constitution. 1789, we were doubling every 25 years, just like during colonial times. We were mostly a farming country, rural country, and still almost everyone still lived east of the Appalachian Mountains, but that was slowly changing. As mentioned in Chapter 9, we still had economic problems. Even as we started out as a new country, we didn't have much revenue coming in. Because the Articles did not have the power to tax. Hopefully the new Constitution was going to fix that. The debt was high, especially in the states from the war, so many states were in debt. And we had high inflation, high prices, and it's difficult for people to buy things when prices are high. Who saves the day? And 5 years ago, I loved the guy. Now I'm very, very questioning the guy, and in 10 years, I'll probably hate his guts. Kidding, I'm not much of a hater. One word, relationships. All right, next section is on Washington, and he did not have a political party, but his beliefs were very much like the Federalists. That's why it's called the Pro-Federalist regime. He was unanimously selected, the only president ever to be unanimously selected as president by the Electoral College in 1789. A great character, not a brilliant man, but a great leader. New York City was our first nation's capital for a couple years, and then they moved it down to Philadelphia for 10 years, and then finally, fire up Washington, D.C. Also on page 191, just look at the page, some of the table there, and there were three main parts of the executive branch, which we call the cabinet. The Secretary of State was headed by Thomas Jefferson. That's impressive. Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, the man who really helped save our country, although he was not a relationship guy. And then you don't need to worry about the next two. Again, a lot of sections in this chapter, so we're going to go quickly through this. The Bill of Rights, a must know. Many anti-federalists, again, those are people who were not supportive of the Constitution, they wanted individual rights. They were upset the Constitution did not have that. They wanted freedom of religion, freedom of press, trial by jury, so they wanted these added into the Constitution. And so in 1791, during the first Congress, our Congress helped create the first 10 amendments, and these are known as the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and some of our most important freedoms in America are in these 10 amendments, such as religion, speech, the press, and so on. But I'm going to really focus on the 9th and 10th amendments, and these are all important up here, extremely important. But number 9 and especially 10, I want you to know. For number 9, it said certain rights shall not be denied to the people. Okay, so people definitely are going to be able to have rights in America. And number 10, definitely highlight this one. All the rights that are not in the Constitution are preserved for the states. So this is called the States' Rights Amendment. So this was trying to appease many of the states' rights leaders, such as Jefferson and Patrick Henry. So what this means is if the Constitution doesn't talk about it, the issue then is controlled by the states. They have power over that issue. Thing about this section on the Bill of Rights, I would just highlight the Judiciary Act of 1789 was passed by Congress, and it does organize the Supreme Court, and the court system was organized by Congress, and that's going to become important, the Supreme Court, when we get to the early 1800s. We talk about a man named John Marshall. Don't need to worry that John Jay was the first Chief Justice, but it's interesting to know that we only had 6 justices on the Supreme Court. Today we have 9. Right, Alexander Hamilton, incredible leader during this time period. I mean, he does really save our country from collapse. He does make it a stronger federal government. So he is very important. However, not too nice. All right, so his characteristics again, he is a brilliant financial wizard. He does help our economy and our country thrive, and he will become the leading Federalist. So connection: Alexander Hamilton was a Federalist. John Adams was also a Federalist, but he is the one that I want you to make a connection to and highlight this. He favored the wealthy or the property classes. He said we've got to protect these people because if they're doing well, the economy overall should be doing well, and that should trickle down to the masses. So everybody else should eventually have an improvement in their lives, especially if the wealthy are doing fine. Continuing to highlight this assumption, and this is when the federal government was going to assume the state debts after the revolution. So many states owed France money, owed other people money, and so our federal government decided to take over these debts from the states. And so that made many of the states happy. However, many people said that's not a good idea, and a rivalry is developed between Hamilton and Jefferson, who is the leading anti federalist. These two guys absolutely hate each other. I don't know, is there a stronger word than hate? I don't know, but if there was one, that would basically relate to Hamilton and Jefferson. You want more? Guess who else hated Hamilton? John Adams. I'd probably say John Marshall. Aaron Burr hated him. How do you know? Remember he hated him? Aaron Burr hated him because he shot him in the head. Sorry about that rant. Got off topic. Finishing up. So, assumptions, a must know. Highlight that. The federal government's taking over state debts. Some states that were in heavy debt were very happy. Massachusetts had a ton of debt, and now they don't have to pay their debts off anymore. However, Virginia is not happy. They had very little debt after the revolution, and they're like, hey, Massachusetts, they get a huge break. What about us? So, this leads to a lot of people to dislike this program, especially Jefferson. I wonder where Jefferson is from. He's from Virginia. All right, there he is in all of his essence. Alexander Hamilton. Just, yes, there he is. All right, so the whole assumption issue was a hot topic, and so Hamilton and Jefferson cut a deal. They basically said that the federal government would assume the state debt. So assumption did happen. However, the new capital, after 10 years, would go down to the District of Columbia between Maryland and Virginia, and would eventually become known as Washington, D.C. So the South, so a compromise did happen, which is a good thing. The South got the capital very close to Virginia. Alexander Hamilton, it never ends, which is a good thing because he did a lot of good things. All right, so the national debt was 75 million by 1790. So our government owed people, other countries, a bunch of money. Hamilton's called the father of the national debt, and he actually said, this is odd because you never probably hear this today, that the national debt was a blessing. He said that it's okay for the government to owe people money because whoever we owe money to, the creditors that the government owes money to, these people would have a personal stake in the success of our government. So if we owed somebody, let's say $1,000, they are going to want the United States government to do well because they want to get their $1,000 back plus interest. To pay for this debt and to finance other parts of the government, Hamilton generated tax revenue. That's something the articles could not do. The tax revenues came from tariffs, which was basically with foreign trade and customs duties. I want you to highlight this right here. Potential testing. Customs refers to tariffs. And basically, any imported good from another country is going to have to pay a tax to our government. So our government is going to make revenues off imported goods. And a goal of this tariff, besides the revenue to help pay for things, was to protect American manufacturing. So American factories were slowly starting to develop in the 1790s and are really going to take off after 1800. And the region with the most manufacturers, you may want to guess, it's not the South because they're very rural. It was somewhat in the middle colonies, but most of the manufacturing is going to be in New England. They're the ones that are going to have the most factories. Besides the tariff, the other way to generate revenue was through the excise tax. And I would highlight this, and I would highlight whiskey. This tax is basically on any whiskey that was produced in the country. So any whiskey distillers would have to pay this tax. And any specific people upset about this? Well, obviously the alcoholics were probably going to be upset about this, but also the people that made the whiskey did not want to pay this tax. I sense a rebellion. Wow, more Hamilton. What a surprise. He battles Jefferson for a bank, and you need to highlight this. The Bus. What a sweet name. I want something to be called the Bus. That makes no sense. The Bank of the United States is called the Bus, and it's established under Hamilton, so it's a bank. This bank was a private bank where the government would be the major stockholder. So it was a private company that would try to make money, make a profit, but the government would put their money in this bank. And it was modeled after the Bank of England, which is not that important, but it was the place to put our money. In addition, by having our federal money in this bank, it would help stimulate businesses by lending out money for loans, so businesses could create new products by taking out loans. Also, when the economy needed it, it would print more money, so the bus could do this as well. Now, here's the key thing. I want to highlight this. There's absolutely no reference to the bus to the Bank of the United States in the Constitution. Doesn't say anything about it. And so the biggest thing is, was it legal to create? And I sense conflict coming. We'll get to that in the next slide. So finishing up the bus, the Bank of the United States was passed in 1791 by Congress, and this is for a 20-year charter. So we are going to have this bank for 20 years. Some people are very mad. We'll get to that next. All right, hopefully we're about halfway done. I think I can get this under 25 minutes. I'm very fired up. Continuing this section about the bus. So now the conflict arises when Jefferson, who absolutely hates Hamilton, Jefferson and others that have his beliefs didn't think the bus was needed, and they didn't think it was constitutional. And so this is a huge debate. And so you need to highlight these two things. Jefferson, who was an anti-federalist, wanted strict interpretation of the Constitution. This is a absolute must-know. Basically, he wanted, if it doesn't say you can do it in the Constitution, you can't do it. You can only do what's said in the Constitution. Hamilton, who was a Federalist, highlight this, wanted loose. So he was loose interpretation, and so basically he says if the Constitution doesn't say anything about an idea, then we can do it. And Hamilton justified his action for creating the bus through the necessary and proper clause. Highlight this. This is a clause in the Constitution, also called the Elastic Clause, which basically allows Congress to create laws to carry out their function. And so this is what he used to help create the bus. All right, this is a beautiful table. I'm not going over any of it, but we already talked about these four things. These are Hamilton's role as a treasury, four very important things: assumption, tariff, excise tax, the bus. And here's how it impacted America. Enjoy reading. Quickly, document 192, 195. This is a cool little table. And so here are all the debts that we have. We have state debts that we assume through assumption, other debts from the federal government, debts owed to other countries. And basically, these things are going to be paid for through the excise tax, custom duties, also called tariffs. Customs are tariffs. And so this is how we are going to pay for our debts, and how we're going to run our government was through these two things, especially the excise and especially the tariff. All right, more alliteration. Mutinous moonshiners in Pennsylvania. 1794 Whisker Rebellion. Highlight this huge event. Backcountry, western Pennsylvania. When you think of this, you got to think of the Scots-Irish and think about alcohol and not trusting the government too much. Many of these people in the backcountry of Pennsylvania, they grew rye and corn, and in order to help make a profit, they actually distilled this into alcohol, especially whiskey, because it was more profitable for them. And so they did not like this excise tax created by Alexander Hamilton, and so they were mad it took away their profits. And so some farmers in Pennsylvania became very extreme. They were radical farmers, and they tarred and feathered some revenue officers. So people that came to collect the excise tax got tarred and feathered, which was not pleasant. Very similar in a lot of ways to Sons of Liberty tax collectors with the Stamp Act in the 1760s. So Washington, how does he respond? He comes after them with a vengeance, and he calls for a militia to go to Pennsylvania. He calls for many people from several states to join his army. So he has 13,000 people join him to western. He leads them out there to western Pennsylvania, 13,000 soldiers, and the Whiskey Rebellion absolutely has no chance. And so it is absolutely crushed. And the quote from the book, it's kind of interesting. It's using a sledgehammer to crush a gnat. I'll let you just think about that on your own. Only 3 people were killed, 2 were eventually pardoned. So it was not a huge in terms of deaths or injuries, but the huge thing is all about causes and significance. And the significance of the Whiskey Rebellion is that our new government got respect, and they crushed this rebellion. It was nowhere near as scary as Shays' Rebellion from Massachusetts in 1786. The federal government is in charge now. All right, emergence of political parties. Hamilton's financial plan was a success, so he did help stabilize our government, especially our economy. So good for him. Okay, and here are the four things: assumption, excise tax, the bank. They did help bring down the Whiskey Rebellion. However, a lot of these ideas basically did create an opposition, and the main opposition to his programs were the states' rights. They thought the federal government had way too much power, and these opposition leaders were mostly Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So a must know, Hamilton supporters formed the Federalist Party in the early 1790s. Jefferson supporters were originally anti-Federalists, but eventually they have their first other political party called the Democratic Republicans. So you need to highlight that, think of Hamilton, highlight this, think of TJ. Washington was neutral. He had no party. He was against political parties. He said they would tear our nation apart. And he said they would work against each other and not for the country. So he warned against political parties, especially during his farewell address. However, of the two parties, Washington was definitely most closely associated with the Federalists. Hamilton was one of his best buddies. Despite Washington's warning, some people did feel that having two parties is actually a good thing because they make sure the people that are in power never go too far against the wishes of the people. Next section is the impact of the French Revolution. Foreign affairs, another big issue during Washington's presidency, especially in France. Okay, the two groups that don't like each other, the Federalists and Jefferson and the anti-Federalist Democratic Republicans, you have to know which country each side supported. So Hamilton was pro-British, must know. Jefferson was pro-France. And just think about French Revolution. They were definitely for an uprising of the poor people, and so Jefferson was definitely more for them. Hamilton was more for the elitists, especially in Britain. So Jefferson also was pro-France, but he was also for the French Revolution. So he's like, yes, we. Jefferson said a little rebellion now and then is a good thing. The Federalists initially probably supported the French Revolution, but then the French Revolution turned very violent with the reign of, I don't know why I'm laughing, it's terrible. With the Reign of Terror in 1793, it was a head-rolling event, according to your author, not me. So it was awful. A lot of people were killed, and so it became mobocracy in charge. And the Federalists, who are again more for the wealthy, initially did support the revolution, but now were very much against it. They said that it was out of control, it was mobocracy. So this is partially why the Federalists are pro-British, because they don't like what happened in France, and Jefferson was definitely for the French. Eventually, who gets involved to fight the French in 1793? Well, it is the British. They do go to war with France, and so France and Britain are at war. Now the question is, what is America going to do with this war between France and Britain? Well, George Washington decides to declare a neutrality proclamation. We are not going to help any side. Many Democratic Republicans, that was Teddy Roosevelt, that was Thomas Jefferson, they wanted the U.S. to help France's war. So the DRs wanted to help France. Washington said no. Okay, war has to be avoided at all costs. And he had a good reason to keep us neutral because we were militarily weak. We really couldn't fight in one of the big countries. The economy was still had many issues going on, and so he didn't want to upset that, and we were not very politically united. So he said, going to war is a bad thing. So he issues, highlight this, the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793, and basically Washington declared American neutrality in world conflict and to be impartial on both sides. Thus, this Neutrality Proclamation begins basically 100 years of isolationist tradition. We are not going to get involved very much with the rest of the world. In 1823, we're going to pass the Monroe Doctrine, which continues our isolationist policies. And then around the year 1898, we finally end it with a war. Any guesses? I'll give you 2 seconds. In 1898, we had a war with Spain over Cuba and the Philippines. Finally, I would just highlight this. This was an event that kind of tested our neutrality. It was a Citizen Genet incident in 1793. It's kind of confusing. Long story short, this guy was a French ambassador to America. So this guy comes from France to America to basically start kind of a rebellion against the British shippers in the West Indies. And so he goes to South Carolina, to Charleston, and he gets some Americans to like join him to fight against the British. And so he was a threat to American neutrality. Washington's like, you need to stop this now. You're starting a war potentially with us and Britain. So in the end, this guy does back off, trying to use Americans to fight the British in the West Indies. But it does cause some tension between Washington and the British. All right, almost done flying through this. Next, a lot of sections in Chapter 10. Embroilments with Britain. So, Britain was a problem for America. They kept their troops in some of the northern frontier posts. I don't think it's in Britain, it's in America, but yet they had troops in America. That's bad. The Treaty of Paris said that they had to leave, but they still didn't, but they didn't care what we thought of them. They stayed there because they wanted to keep the fur trade up with Native Americans. In addition, the British were annoying Americans because they sold firearms or weapons to Native Americans. These Indians were using these weapons to attack American settlers out west in the old Northwest. In the West Indies, you want some more British problem? In the West Indies, the British Royal Navy seized 300 American merchant ships. They took our ships from us and they impressed American sailors. I would highlight this term, impressment of American seamen. Basically, what they did is they took Americans off our ships and they basically forced them to work on British ships. So it was almost to some degree like a forced slavery, but not near as harsh. So here's the definition of impressment, which I did already mention. And then all the key thing is the result of all these actions. They are angering Jeffersonians. The Democratic Republicans are hating Britain right now, and they want revenge. I mean, potentially they might want to go to war, but they had a problem. The Federalists like the British, and so how are we going to solve all these conflicts with Britain? I got an idea. Let's create a treaty. Okay. And this treaty is called the Treaty of Guadalupe. I'm sorry, wrong treaty. This treaty was called Jay's Treaty, named after the potato chip. No, I'm kidding. Okay, anyway, so Jay's Treaty, Washington's farewell. So this is trying to end the problems with Britain. Washington sends John Jay to Britain to calm things down because, again, things are getting testy. Britain is treating us terribly. So highlight this Jay's Treaty. A lot of things involved with this. First of all, the good, somewhat good, not good of Jay's Treaty. The good. Britain agreed to pay the damages to the United States for recent ship seizures. We talked about they took 300 of our ships, so they did pay us money for that. Somewhat good. Britain promised to remove troops from U.S. soil, but that was just a promise. It took them a while to do that, and so that they didn't come through on that. The not good. The British did not agree to stop future raids and impressment, so they are going to keep doing that in the West Indies. More not good. The British did not agree to stop supplying arms to the Indians, so they're going to keep giving Native Americans weapons. These weapons are going to harm Americans. There's more not good. The U.S. had to pay the debts owed to the British merchants for money we owed them. And so the bottom line is many Democratic Republicans felt like Jay's Treaty gave the British way too much. So the Democratic Republicans hated Jay's Treaty and they became a stronger political force which basically bound this political party together to help them run and become the president in 1796, which they actually lost to the Federalists. I believe I'm on the last slide. I think I got this under 25 minutes. We will see. I won't know for another 2 hours after I upload. All right, so finishing this up, more issues with other countries. Spain follows with a deal known as Pinckney's Treaty. That's not on your test, so I'm not going to focus on that. But just realize that America did have more navigation in the Mississippi River, which is huge for the trade out west. So we could send our supplies down through New Orleans. And we also gained the disputed territory in northern Florida as well through Pinckney's Treaty, but that's not on your test, so I'm just going to move on. Finally, highlight this one. Washington's farewell address in 1797, he said we need to avoid permanent alliances. We still had the Franco-American alliance from 1778, and he said that temporary alliances are necessary only in extraordinary emergencies. So get rid of permanent alliances. Let's become isolationists. And also in his farewell address, besides avoiding the permanent alliances, despite having this Franco-American alliance, the other thing is he warned against political parties, and that's such a key thing that sectionalism will develop and could cause problems down the road between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans.